Alchemy by Titus Burckhardt. Chapter 1. The Origin of Western Alchemy. Alchemy has existed since at least the middle of the first millennium before Christ, and probably since prehistoric times. To the question, why should alchemy have existed for millennia in such widely separated civilizations as those of the Near East and Far East, the reply of most historians would be that man has repeatedly fallen to the temptation to get rich quickly by seeking to make gold and silver from the common metals, until the empirical chemistry of the 18th century finally proved to him that metals could not be changed into one another. In actual fact, however, the truth is quite different, and in part at least, exactly the opposite. Gold and silver were already sacred metals, even before they became the measure of all commercial transactions. They are the earthly reflections of sun and moon, and thus also of all the realities of spirit and soul which are related to the heavenly pair. Until well into the Middle Ages, the relative values of the two noble metals were determined by the relationship of the rotation times of the two heavenly bodies. Likewise, the oldest coins usually bear pictures or signs having some relation to the sun or its yearly rotation. For men of pre-rationalistic times, the relationship between the noble metals and the two great luminaries was obvious, and a whole world of mechanistic notions and prejudices was necessary to obscure the self-evident reality of this relationship and make it look like a mere aesthetic accident. One must not confuse a symbol with a mere allegory, nor try to see in it the expression of some misty and irrational collective instinct. True symbolism depends on the fact that things which may differ from one another in time, space, material nature, and many other limitative characteristics can possess and exhibit the same essential quality. They thus appear as diverse reflections, manifestations, or productions of the same reality, which in itself is independent of time and space. It is thus not quite right to say that gold represents the sun and silver the moon. Rather, it is the case that the two noble metals and the two luminaries are both symbols of the same two cosmic or divine realities. Footnote: an excellent description of what a symbol means is to be found in the ethnological study by E. Evans Pritchard, Neue Religion, chapter entitled The Problem of Symbols, and this is published by Oxford Clarendon Press, 1956. The magic of gold thus springs from its sacred nature, or qualitative perfection, and only secondarily from its economic value. In view of the sacred nature of gold and silver, the obtaining of these two metals could only be a priestly activity, just as the minting of gold and silver coins was originally the prerogative of certain holy places only. In keeping with this is the fact that the metallurgical procedures relating to gold and silver which have been preserved in some so-called primitive societies from prehistoric times reveal abundant signs of their sacerdotal origin. In archaic cultures, unacquainted as yet with the dichotomy of spiritual and practical, and seeing everything in relation to the inner unity of man and the cosmos, the preparation of ores is always carried out as a sacred procedure. As a rule, it is the prerogative of a priestly caste, called to this activity by divine command. Where this is not so, as in the case of certain African tribes which have no metallurgical tradition of their own, the smelter or smith, as an unauthorized interloper into the sacred order of nature, falls under suspicion of engaging in black magic. What appears to modern man as superstition, and what, in part, only survives as a superstition, is in truth an inkling of the profound relationship between the natural order and the human soul. Primitive man is well aware that the production of ores from the womb of the earth and their violent purification by fire is somehow sinister and fraught with dangerous possibilities, even if he does not have all the proofs with which the history of the metallurgical age has so abundantly provided us. For archaic humanity, which does not artificially separate matter from spirit, the arrival of metallurgy was not simply an invention, but rather a revelation, for only a divine command could authorize mankind in respect of such an activity. From the very beginning, however, this revelation was very much a two-sided one. Footnote: we revealed iron, wherein is evil power and many uses for mankind. That's from the Quran. It demands an especial prudence on the part of him to whom it has been given. Just as the outward work of the metallurgist with ore and fire has something violent about it, so also the influences which bear back on the spirit and the soul, and which are inescapable in this calling, must be of a dangerous and two-sided nature. In particular, the extraction of the noble metals from impure ores by means of solvent and purifying agents such as mercury and antimony, and in conjunction with fire, is inevitably carried out against the resistance of the darksome and chaotic forces of nature, just as the achievement of inward silver or inward gold, in their immutable purity and luminosity, demands the conquest of all the dark and irrational impulses of the soul. The following report from the autobiography of a Senegalese shows how, in certain African tribes, the working of gold has continued to be regarded as a sacred art right up to the present day. And this is Camara Le, L'Enfant Noir, Paris, 1953. On a sign from my father, the two apprentices started working the sheepskin bellows, which were situated on either side of the forge, and connected to it by means of clay pipes. The flames in the forge shot up and seemed to come to life, an animated and evil genius. My father then grasped the smelting pot with his long tongs and placed it on the flames. All of a sudden, all other work in the smithy was stilled, for during the time that gold is being smelted, and while it cools, it is forbidden to work either copper or aluminium in its proximity, in case even a particle of these base metals should enter the smelting pot. Only steel may continue to be worked, but even those engaged on a task with steel would usually finish it quickly or lay it aside in order to join the apprentices gathered round the forge. When my father felt that his movements were being impeded by the apprentices crowding round, he would silently motion them to stand back. Neither he nor anyone else would utter a word. No one dared speak, and even the minstrel was silent. The stillness was broken only by the wheezing of the bellows and the low hissing of the gold. But though my father said not a word, I knew that he spoke inwardly. I could see that from his lips, which moved silently as he stirred the gold and the charcoal with a stick, which as it caught fire he had to keep replacing. What could he be saying inwardly? I cannot say for sure, as he never told me. Yet, what could it be but an invocation? Did he not invoke the spirit of the fire and of the gold, of the fire and of the wind which blew through the bellows, of the fire that was born of the wind, and of the gold that was wedded to the fire? Assuredly, he summoned their help and entreated their friendship and communion. Assuredly, he invoked these spirits which are amongst the most important, and whose aid indeed is necessary for smelting. The process which took place before my eyes was only outwardly the smelting of gold. It was something more besides, a magical process which the spirits could favor or hinder. That is why stillness reigned around my father. Was it not remarkable that, at such a moment, the little black snake always lay hidden under the sheepskin? For it was not always there. It did not come and visit my father every day, yet it never failed to appear when gold was being worked. This did not really surprise me. Ever since one evening my father told me of the spirit of our tribe, I had found it quite natural that the snake should be there, for the snake knew the future. The artisan who works the gold must first of all purify himself, must wash himself from head to foot, and during the time of the work must abstain from sexual intercourse. That there is an inward gold, or rather that gold has an inward as well as an outward reality, was only logical for the contemplative way of looking at things, which spontaneously recognized the same essence in both gold and the sun. It is here and nowhere else that the root of alchemy lies. Alchemy traces its descent back to a priestly art of the ancient Egyptians, the alchemical tradition which spread all over Europe and the Near East, and which perhaps even influenced Indian alchemy, recognizes as its founder Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, who is identifiable with the ancient Egyptian god Thoth, the god who presides over all priestly arts and sciences, rather like Ganesha in Hinduism. The expression alchemia derives from the Arabic alchemia, which is said to derive from the ancient Egyptian keme, a reference to the black earth, which was a designation of Egypt, and which may also have been a symbol of the alchemist's materia prima. Another possibility is that the expression derives from the Greek chema, smelting, or casting. At all events, the oldest extant alchemical drawings are on Egyptian papyri. That no early Egyptian documents remain is not surprising, since it is an essential feature of a sacred art that it is transmitted orally. that it should be committed to writing is usually a first sign of decadence, or of a fear that the oral tradition is going to be lost. Thus, it is completely natural that the so-called corpus hermeticum, which comprises all the texts ascribed to Hermes Thoth, has come down to us in Greek and clothed in a more or less Platonic language. That these texts are nevertheless descended from a genuine tradition and are in no wise pseudo-archaic fabrications of the Greeks is proved by their spiritual fruitfulness. The evidence suggests that the so-called Emerald Tablet is also a part of the Corpus Hermeticum. The Emerald Tablet declares itself to be a revelation from Hermes Trismegistus and is regarded by alchemists writing in Arabic and Latin as nothing less than the table of law of their art. There is no early text of the Emerald Tablet. It has come down to us only in Arabic and Latin translations, at least so far as has been determined up to now, but its contents bespeak its authenticity. In favor of an Egyptian origin of Near Eastern and Western alchemy is the fact that a whole series of artisanal procedures related to alchemy and furnishing it with many of its symbolic expressions crop up as a coherent group from late Egyptian times onwards, finally making an appearance in medieval prescription books. This corpus of procedures contains some elements clearly derivable from Egypt. Among these procedures, apart from the working of metal and the preparation of dyes, is the production of artificial precious stones and colored glass, an art which blossomed nowhere more than in Egypt. Moreover, the whole of the Egyptian art of metals and minerals, in its efforts to extract the secret and precious essence from an earthly substance, shows an obvious spiritual relationship with alchemy. Late Egyptian Alexandria was doubtless this melting pot in which alchemy, along with other cosmological arts and sciences, received the form in which it is now known to us, without thereby being altered in any essential respect. It may well have been at that time also that alchemy acquired certain motifs from Greek and Asiatic mythologies. This must not be regarded as in any way an artificial happening. The growth of a genuine tradition resembles that of a crystal, which attracts homologous particles to itself, incorporating them according to its own laws of unity. From this time onwards, one can observe two currents in alchemy. One is predominantly artisanal in nature. The symbolism of an inward work appears here as something superadded to a professional activity, and is only mentioned occasionally and incidentally. The other makes use of metallurgical processes exclusively as analogies, so that one may even question whether they were ever employed outwardly. This has caused some to make a distinction between artisanal alchemy, believed to be the older, and a so-called mystical alchemy, which is supposed to have developed later. In reality, however, it is a case of two aspects of one and the same tradition, of which the symbolical aspect is undoubtedly the more archaic. It will no doubt be asked how it was possible for alchemy, together with its mythological ground, to be incorporated into the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The explanation of this is that the cosmological perspectives proper to alchemy, relating as they do both to the outward realm of metals and of minerals in general, and to the inward realm of the soul, were organically bound up with ancient metallurgy, so that the cosmological background was taken over, along with the craft, simply as a science of nature, physis, in the broadest sense of the term, rather as Christianity and Islam appropriated the Pythagorean tradition in music and architecture and assimilated the corresponding spiritual perspective. From the Christian point of view, alchemy was like a natural mirror for the revealed truths. The philosopher's stone, which turned base metals into silver and gold, is a symbol of Christ, and its production from the non-burning fire of sulfur and the steadfast water of quicksilver resembles the birth of Christ Emmanuel. By its assimilation into Christian belief, alchemy was spiritually fecundated, while Christianity found in it a way which, through the contemplation of nature, led to a true gnosis. Even more easily did the hermetic art enter into the spiritual world of Islam. The latter was always ready in principle to recognize any pre-Islamic art which appeared under the aspect wisdom, hikmah, as a heritage of earlier prophets. Thus, in the Islamic world, Hermes Trismegistus is often identified with Enoch, Idris. It was the doctrine of the oneness of essence, wahdat al-wujud, the esoteric interpretation of the Islamic confession of faith, which gave to Hermetism a new spiritual axis, or in other words, reestablished its original spiritual horizon in all its fullness and freed it from the suffocation of late Hellenistic naturalism. Meanwhile, the symbolism of alchemy, as a result of its gradual incorporation into late classical and Semitic thought, had developed into a variegated multiplicity. Nevertheless, certain fundamental traits proper to alchemy as an art remained as its infallible token throughout the centuries. Above all, the definite plan of the alchemical work, the individual phases of which are characterized by certain symbolical processes which cannot always be carried out in practice. In the first instance, alchemy made its entry into Western Christendom through Byzantium, and later, and even more richly, through Arab-dominated Spain. It was in the Islamic world that alchemy reached its fullest flowering. Jabir ibn Hayyan, a pupil of the 6th Shiite Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, founded in the 8th century AD a whole school from which hundreds of alchemical texts flowed forth. No doubt it was because the name Jabir had become the hallmark of such alchemical lore that the author of the Summa Perfectionis, a 13th century Italian or Catalan, also assumed the name in its Latinized form of Geber. When, with the Renaissance, the great inrush of Greek philosophy occurred, a new wave of Byzantine alchemy reached the West. In the 16th and 17th centuries, many alchemical works were printed, which until then had existed only as manuscripts and had circulated more or less secretly. As a result of this, the study of Hermetism reached a new peak. It was soon, however, to enter into decadence. The 17th century has often been regarded as a marking the full flowering of European Hermetism. In reality, however, its decadence had already begun in the 15th century and proceeded apace with the humanistic and already fundamentally rationalistic development of Western thought, by which any spiritual and intuitive universality of outlook was deprived of its very basis. It is true that for a certain time immediately preceding the modern age, elements of genuine gnosis, which had been squeezed out of the realm of theology both by the unilaterally sentimental development of later Christian mysticism and by the agnostic trend inherent in the Reformation, found refuge in speculative alchemy. This undoubtedly explains phenomena such as the echoes of Hermetism to be detected in the works of Shakespeare, Jakob Böhme, and Georg Gichtel. The medicine which derived from alchemy lived on longer than alchemy itself. Paracelsus called this spagyric medicine. The term comes from the Greek words sparo and agero, divide and unite, corresponding to the alchemical solve et coagula. In general, European alchemy following the Renaissance had a fragmented character. As a spiritual art, the metaphysical background was lacking. This is especially true of its last remnants in the 18th century, even despite the fact that amongst all the charcoal burners, men of real genius, such as Newton and Goethe, concerned themselves with it, though unsuccessfully. At this point, it seems opportune to state categorically that there can be no free-thinking alchemy hostile to the Church, for the first prerequisite of every spiritual art is that it should recognize everything that the human condition, in its preeminence and in its precariousness, needs by way of means of salvation. That there was also a pre-Christian alchemy in no wise proves the contrary. At all times, alchemy was an organic part of a comprehensive tradition which in some manner embraced all aspects of human existence. To the extent, however, that Christianity revealed truths which had been hidden to pre-Christian antiquity, these had to be taken into account by alchemy on pain of suicide. It is thus a major error to believe that alchemy or Hermetism by itself could possibly be a self-sufficient religion, or even a secret paganism. Any attitude of this sort would necessarily be so tinged with rationalism and humanism as to paralyze from the start any effort towards the inward magisterium. It is true that the Spirit bloweth where it listeth, and one cannot from the outside impose dogmatic bounds on its manifestation. But the Spirit certainly does not blow where it itself, the Holy Ghost, is denied in any of its revelations. In reality, alchemy, which is not a religion by itself, requires to be confirmed by the revelation with its means of grace, which is addressed to all men. This confirmation consists in the alchemical way and work being recognized by the alchemist himself as one particular means of access to the full meaning of the eternal and saving message of revelation. We must dwell no longer on the history of alchemy, which in any case is not known in detail, no doubt largely because the handing on of an esoteric art usually takes place orally. One final point should, however, be mentioned: the fact that alchemical writings often bear fantastic names, out of all relation to chronology, allegedly as their authors or sources, in no wise militates against the worth of the texts in question. For quite apart from the fact that the historical viewpoint and alchemical wisdom have nothing to do with one another, these names, as in the case of the Latin Geber, are indications of a given chain of tradition rather than intended as signatures of authorship. The question as to whether a given hermetical text is genuine or not, that is to say, whether it proceeds from true knowledge and experience of the hermetic art or has been merely arbitrarily put together, cannot be determined either by philology or by a comparison with empirical chemistry. The only criterion is the spiritual unity of the tradition itself.